The colony of Haven 7 was not meant to be a battleground. It had started as a quiet outpost on the edge of human space, a place where settlers could build new lives, far from the chaos of Earth's crowded cities and political turmoil. The planet itself was harsh but beautiful, with jagged mountains that pierced the sky and vast plains covered in tall grasses that shimmered silver under the twin suns. For years, the colonists worked hard to carve out a home here, building farms, schools, and small towns that slowly grew into thriving communities. But now, all of that effort seemed like it might have been for nothing. For weeks, the Krill had been attacking without mercy. These alien creatures were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They looked like giant insects, their bodies covered in chitinous armor that glinted menacingly in the sunlight. Their limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, and they moved with a speed and coordination that made them terrifying opponents. Worst of all, they seemed to have no fear, no sense of self-preservation. Every time the colonists thought they had driven the Krill back, another wave would come, larger and more aggressive than the last. Daniel Carter stood on the crumbling wall that surrounded what used to be the main settlement. His hands rested on the barrel of an old machine gun mounted there, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. He wasn't a soldier by training. He had been an engineer back on Earth, designing water purification systems for remote villages. But when the Krill attacked, everyone who could hold a weapon became part of the defense force. Now, Daniel found himself leading this ragtag group of survivors, trying to keep them alive against impossible odds. Behind him, Rachel Miller knelt beside a wounded man, her hands steady as she applied pressure to a deep gash on his leg. She was a medic, though she often joked that she learned most of her skills from watching videos online rather than formal schooling. Still, she had saved countless lives over the past few weeks, stitching wounds, setting broken bones, and comforting those who needed hope more than medicine. Her blonde hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, streaked with dirt and sweat, but her blue eyes remained sharp and focused. Even in the middle of chaos, Rachel never lost her calm. "We can't keep this up much longer," Daniel muttered, half to himself and half to Rachel. His voice was hoarse from shouting orders and warnings during the endless battles. "Every day we lose more people, more buildings, more ground." Rachel glanced up at him briefly before returning her attention to the injured man. "I know," she said softly. "But we don't have a choice, do we? If we stop fighting, they'll overrun us completely." Daniel didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the makeshift barricades that lined the perimeter of the settlement. What had once been sturdy walls made of concrete and steel was now little more than piles of rubble held together by desperation. The colonists had fortified everything they could, using whatever materials they could scavenge. Old shipping containers, broken machinery, even furniture from abandoned homes. But none of it was enough to stop the Krill forever. At least the attacks followed a pattern. The Krill usually struck just after dawn or just before sunset, taking advantage of the low light to confuse their targets. During the day, the colonists worked frantically to repair damage, gather supplies, and tend to the wounded. At night, they huddled together in whatever shelter they could find, listening to the eerie clicking sounds the Krill made as they patrolled outside the walls. Sleep was rare, and restful sleep was almost non-existent. Despite the exhaustion, Daniel forced himself to stay alert. He knew that if he let his guard down even for a moment, it could mean disaster for everyone. That's why he spent most of his time on the wall, keeping watch while others rested. It wasn't just about protecting the colony. It was about giving people something to believe in. If they saw him standing strong, maybe they would find the strength to keep going too. But belief was running thin these days. Communication with Earth had been cut off almost immediately after the first Krill attack. The aliens had some kind of jamming technology that blocked all signals, leaving Haven 7 completely isolated. At first, the colonists clung to the hope. That help was on the way, that Earth Command would send ships and soldiers to drive the Krill away. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope began to fade. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone knew the truth. They were alone. Rachel finished bandaging the man's leg and helped him stand. "You should get inside," she told him gently. "Rest while you can." The man nodded weakly and limped away, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. Rachel watched him go, her expression grim. She had seen so many injuries like this over the past few weeks, and she knew that some of them wouldn't heal properly, not without proper medical care, which they didn't have. Supplies were running dangerously low, and every day brought new challenges. Food was rationed strictly, water was scarce, and ammunition was dwindling faster than anyone liked to admit. As Rachel climbed up onto the wall to join Daniel, she noticed the tension in his shoulders. He always carried the weight of leadership heavily, even though he rarely complained about it. She wished she could take some of that burden from him, but she knew there was only so much she could do. So instead, she stood beside him, offering silent support. "What are we going to do?" she asked finally, breaking the silence between them. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she feared the answer. Daniel sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. "We try again," he said simply. "We send another distress signal. Maybe someone will hear it this time." Rachel frowned. "That's what we've been doing for weeks. Nothing's changed." "I know," Daniel replied, his tone firm despite the weariness in his voice. "But it's all we've got. We can't just give up." Rachel didn't argue. She understood why Daniel felt the need to keep trying even if it seemed futile. Giving up meant accepting defeat, and that was something neither of them was ready to do. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were grasping at straws, hoping for a miracle that might never come. Later that evening, Daniel gathered a small team to work on repairing an old satellite dish they had salvaged from the ruins of the settlement. It was a risky operation. The krill were still active outside the walls, and venturing out meant risking their lives. But Daniel believed it was worth it. If they could boost the range of their transmission, maybe someone somewhere would hear their plea for help. The team worked quickly, their movements precise and efficient. They didn't speak much, focusing all their energy on the task at hand. Rachel stayed close by, ready to treat any injuries that might arise. As the hours passed, the dish began to take shape, its metal surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. When it was finally complete, Daniel stepped back to inspect their work. "It's not perfect," he admitted, running a hand along the base of the dish. "But it'll have to do." Rachel nodded. "Let's hope it works." With no time to waste, Daniel activated the transmitter and sent out the distress signal. The message was simple. "This is Haven 7. We are under attack by hostile forces. Please, if anyone can hear this, send help." He repeated it several times, each word heavy with urgency and despair. Then he switched off the transmitter and waited. Minutes ticked by, then hours. There was no response, no sign that anyone had heard their call. The silence was deafening, weighing heavily on everyone's shoulders. Daniel clenched his fists, fighting back frustration and anger. He wanted to scream, to rage against the universe for abandoning them, but he didn't. Instead, he forced himself to remain calm, to focus on the next step. "We'll try again tomorrow," he said, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "And the day after that. And the day after that. Until someone answers." Rachel placed a hand on his arm, offering what little comfort she could. "We'll make it through this," she said firmly. "Together." Daniel looked at her, gratitude flickering in his eyes. He didn't say anything, but he didn't need to. In that moment, they both knew that as long as they had each other, and as long as they refused to give up, they still had a chance, and so the colonists prepared for another day of survival, clinging to the fragile hope that someday, somehow, aid would come. They didn't know it yet, but their prayers were about to be answered in a way none of them could have imagined. The days that followed the latest distress signal were some of the hardest yet for the colonists of Haven 7. The krill attacks had grown more frequent and brutal, their numbers seemingly endless. Every hour felt like an eternity as Daniel Carter and Rachel Miller worked tirelessly to keep the colony standing. Supplies were almost gone, and morale was at its lowest point. The colonists had begun to lose faith that anyone would ever come to their aid. They whispered among themselves about how long they could hold out before the inevitable happened. Some even suggested surrendering to the krill, though no one knew what fate awaited them if they did. Daniel refused to entertain such thoughts. He knew giving up meant certain death, not just for him, but for everyone who depended on him. So he pushed forward, organizing patrols, repairing defenses, and rationing what little food and water remained. Rachel stayed by his side, treating wounds and comforting those who needed it most. Together they tried to keep the fragile thread of hope alive, even as it grew thinner with each passing day. It was during one of these tense moments that something extraordinary happened. The Krill had launched another attack, swarming the settlement in overwhelming numbers. The colonists fought back with everything they had left, firing rifles and throwing makeshift explosives from behind crumbling barricades. The air was thick, with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal. Screams echoed across the battlefield as people fell, injured or worse. Just when it seemed like the Krill would finally break through, a deafening roar split the sky. Everyone froze, their eyes turning upward. A massive shadow passed over the settlement, blotting out the twin suns. At first, no one could believe what they were seeing. Hovering above them was a ship unlike anything they had ever encountered. Its sleek design gleamed in the sunlight, and its sheer size made the Krill forces below look tiny in comparison. It was unmistakably human, a warship bearing the emblem of Earth Command. For a moment there was complete silence as the colonists stared in awe. Then cheers erupted, loud and desperate, filling the air with a mix of relief and disbelief. The ship identified itself as the USS Vanguard, a heavy cruiser, sent in response to Haven 7's distress call. Within minutes, fighter craft began launching from its hangar bays, streaking toward the Krill forces with precision and speed. Lasers flashed across the sky, cutting down waves of alien attackers. The tide of the battle shifted almost instantly, and the Krill, caught off guard by the sudden arrival of reinforcements, began retreating into the distance. The colonists watched in stunned silence as their enemies fled, leaving behind only smoke and destruction. When the immediate threat was neutralized, Captain Laura Hayes, the commanding officer of the Vanguard, contacted the settlement via radio. Her voice was calm and authoritative, carrying a sense of reassurance that the colonists hadn't felt in weeks. She explained that her crew had detected the distress signal while patrolling the outer rim of human space, though Haven 7 was far. From their intended route, they couldn't ignore the plea for help. Daniel and Rachel exchanged glances, both overwhelmed by the realization that salvation had finally arrived. Later that evening, Captain Hayes and a small team of officers landed near the settlement in a shuttlecraft. Daniel and Rachel greeted them outside the main barricade, their faces a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. Hayes stepped out of the shuttle, her uniform immaculate despite the chaos around her. She was tall and imposing, with sharp features and piercing green eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the devastated colony. "I'm glad we got here in time," Hayes said, extending a hand to Daniel. Her tone was warm but professional, betraying none of the strain she must have felt leading her crew into uncharted territory. "Thank you," Daniel replied, shaking her hand firmly. His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotion he had been holding back. "We thought we were done for." Hayes nodded solemnly. "You've held out longer than anyone could have expected under these conditions. You should be proud." Rachel stepped forward then, introducing herself and offering a brief summary of the colony's current state. Hayes listened intently, occasionally asking questions about the Krill's tactics and the extent of the damage. As they spoke, Daniel noticed something odd about the captain's demeanor. She seemed friendly enough, but there was a guardedness in her expression, as though she were hiding something important. After the initial introductions, Hayes suggested moving the conversation indoors. The group gathered in what remained of the settlement's central building, a structure that had once housed the colony's administration offices. Now it was little more than a shell, its walls scorched and its roof partially collapsed. Still, it provided shelter from the wind that carried ash and debris across the landscape. As they sat around a makeshift table, Hayes outlined her plan to secure Haven 7. She proposed evacuating the colonists temporarily so her engineers could fortify the planet's defenses against future Krill invasions. The idea was met with cautious optimism. While the colonists were eager to escape the constant threat of attack, many were reluctant to leave their homes behind. Daniel voiced their concerns, emphasizing the importance of staying close to their land and resources. "We understand your hesitation," Hayes said, leaning forward slightly. "But this is the best way to ensure your survival. Trust me when I say we're here to help." Her words carried weight, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He glanced at Rachel, who gave him a subtle nod, silently agreeing that they needed to proceed carefully. For now, they accepted Hayes's proposal, knowing they didn't have many options. Over the next few days, preparations for the evacuation began in earnest. The Vanguard dispatched supply shuttles to deliver food, water, and medical aid to the colonists. Morale improved dramatically as people realized they wouldn't have to face the Krill alone anymore. Children laughed for the first time in weeks, and families reunited after being separated during the chaos of battle. Even the injured seemed to recover faster, buoyed by the knowledge that help had finally arrived. Despite the renewed sense of hope, Daniel remained vigilant. He spent hours reviewing the Vanguard's logs and mission reports, searching for any inconsistencies or red flags. What he found troubled him deeply. The ship's records mentioned classified missions and experimental technology that shouldn't exist outside of theoretical research. When he questioned Lieutenant Emily Dawson, one of the junior officers assisting with the evacuation, she became visibly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, sir," Dawson stammered. "I don't have clearance to discuss those details," Daniel pressed. Further, but Dawson refused to elaborate. Frustrated, he shared his findings with Rachel, who agreed that something didn't add up. Why would Earth Command send such an advanced ship to a remote colony like Haven 7? And why were the crew members so evasive when asked about their mission? Rachel decided to investigate further, using her role as a medic to gain access to restricted areas of the settlement where the Vanguard's personnel were stationed. She struck up conversations with the crew, subtly probing for information. One evening, while treating a minor injury sustained by a young ensign named Alex Monroe, she learned something alarming. The Vanguard hadn't communicated with Earth Command in months, not since entering uncharted territory on a secret mission. "What kind of mission?" Rachel asked casually, pretending to adjust the bandage on Alex's arm. Alex hesitated, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Project Horizon," he whispered. "That's all I know. Everyone says it's critical to humanity's survival." Rachel thanked him and excused herself, her mind racing. Whatever Project Horizon was, it clearly involved risks that extended beyond protecting Haven 7. She reported her findings to Daniel, who grew increasingly suspicious. He knew they needed more answers, but getting them wouldn't be easy. Meanwhile, Captain Hayes continued to oversee the evacuation process, her presence reassuring yet enigmatic. She often visited the settlement, speaking with the colonists and offering words of encouragement. But Daniel couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in the back of his mind. Something about the Vanguard felt off, as though its arrival wasn't entirely altruistic. One night, as the last of the colonists prepared to board the shuttles, Daniel stood on the wall overlooking the settlement. The sight of the Vanguard hovering in orbit filled him with conflicting emotions. Relief warred with suspicion, gratitude battled with distrust. He didn't know what the future held, but he vowed to protect his people no matter what. Rachel joined him a few moments later, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think we can trust them?" she asked quietly. Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed on the distant warship. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we'll find out soon enough." And with that, they turned away from the wall, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The evacuation of Haven 7 proceeded quickly, though not without tension. The colonists boarded shuttles in small groups, their faces a mix of relief and unease. Many were grateful to leave the constant threat of Krill attacks behind, but others couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about the USS Vanguard. Daniel Carter and Rachel Miller stayed close to the settlement until the very end, overseeing the final preparations and ensuring no one was left behind. They worked tirelessly, their suspicions about the warship growing stronger with each passing hour. As the last shuttle lifted off, carrying the remaining colonists into orbit, Daniel and Rachel found themselves aboard the Vanguard for the first time. The ship was massive, its corridors wide and dimly lit, lined with metal walls that hummed faintly with power. Crew members moved briskly, their uniforms crisp and their expressions focused. To the colonists, it felt like stepping into another world, a place where order and discipline reigned supreme, far removed from the chaos they had endured on Haven 7. Captain Laura Hayes greeted them personally upon their arrival, her demeanor calm and professional as always. She led them to a briefing room near the command center, where holographic displays showed detailed maps of Haven 7 and plans for fortifying its defenses. Hayes explained that her engineers would begin work immediately, using advanced technology to create barriers and traps designed to repel future Krill invasions. Her words were reassuring, but Daniel noticed how vague she remained about specific details. "What exactly are these defenses?" Daniel asked, his tone polite but probing. "And how long will it take to finish?" Hayes hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering. "We're deploying modular shield generators along with automated turrets," she said smoothly. "It's cutting-edge tech, and we expect the process to take several days." Rachel glanced at Daniel, catching the flicker of skepticism in his eyes. She decided to push further. "Cutting-edge tech? That sounds expensive. Why use it here? Instead of somewhere closer to Earth?" Hayes smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Haven 7 is important," she replied. "Its location makes it strategic for defending the outer colonies." The explanation sounded plausible, but it didn't sit well with either of them. Something about the captain's careful wording felt rehearsed, as if she were hiding more than she was revealing. After the meeting ended, Daniel and Rachel retreated to a quiet corner of the ship to discuss their concerns. "There's something she's not telling us," Daniel muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Why all this secrecy?" Rachel nodded, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I don't trust her. And I definitely don't trust whatever Project Horizon is." Daniel agreed. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. With the colonists safely aboard the Vanguard, they decided to split up and investigate further. Rachel used her role as a medic to gain access to restricted areas of the ship, offering to assist with minor injuries or illnesses among the crew. Meanwhile, Daniel teamed up with Alex Monroe, the tech-savvy teenager who had earlier mentioned Project Horizon. Together, they began searching for clues in the ship's systems. Alex proved to be invaluable. He had a natural talent for hacking, honed during years of tinkering with old electronics back on Haven 7. Under Daniel's guidance, he accessed encrypted files buried deep within the Vanguard's database. What they found shocked them both. The documents described Project Horizon as an experimental weapon system capable of annihilating entire fleets in seconds. It utilized energy pulses that disrupted molecular bonds, effectively disintegrating anything caught in its radius. According to the logs, the project was still in testing phases, requiring live combat scenarios to calibrate its effects. "This can't be real," Daniel whispered, staring at the screen in disbelief. "They're planning to test this thing on us." Alex looked pale, his hands trembling slightly on the keyboard. "Does Captain Hayes know about this?" "I think she's leading it," Daniel replied grimly. "That's why she's so evasive whenever we ask questions." They knew. They couldn't confront Hayes directly, not yet. Instead, Daniel instructed Alex to keep digging while he shared the information with Rachel. When they met later that evening in an empty storage bay, Rachel listened intently as Daniel explained what they had uncovered. "That's why they chose Haven 7, Rachel said quietly when he finished. "It's remote enough that no one will notice if things go wrong." Daniel clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. "We have to warn the others. If they activate that weapon, it could kill everyone down there, including us." Rachel placed a hand on his arm, her touch grounding him. "We need proof first, solid evidence that we can show the colonists." They spent the next few hours gathering as much data as possible, downloading files and taking screenshots of incriminating documents. By the time they finished, exhaustion weighed heavily on them, but they knew they couldn't rest. Every second counted, especially since the Vanguard's engineers were already hard at work on Haven 7. The following morning, Daniel and Rachel approached Captain Hayes in the command center. They demanded answers, presenting the evidence they had collected. At first, Hayes denied everything, her expression unreadable. But as Daniel pressed harder, pointing out discrepancies in the ship's logs and mission reports, Her mask slipped. For the first time, she looked uneasy. "You don't understand the stakes," Hayes said finally, her voice low and strained. "Humanity is facing extinction. The Krill aren't the only threat out there. We need weapons like Project Horizon to survive. So you're willing to sacrifice innocent people?" Rachel shot back, her voice rising. "To use us as guinea pigs for your experiments?" Hayes sighed, rubbing her temples as if trying to ward off a headache. "It's not that simple. The higher-ups approved this mission. I'm just following orders." "That's not good enough," Daniel snapped. "You brought us here under false pretenses. You lied to us." For a moment, Hayes looked conflicted, as though she might actually feel remorse. Then her expression hardened again. "If you tell the colonists, it'll cause panic. We can't afford that. Not now. We won't let you do this," Rachel said firmly. "Not without a fight." Hayes studied them for a long moment before nodding curtly. "Fine. But remember, you're outnumbered. Don't make this worse than it has to be." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Daniel and Rachel alone in the command center. They exchanged worried glances, knowing they had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The truth was out, but exposing it came with risks neither of them had fully anticipated. Later that day, they gathered a small group of trusted colonists and shared what they had learned. The reaction was immediate and intense. Some were furious, demanding action against the vanguard. Others were terrified, fearing retaliation if they spoke out. Despite the mixed emotions, one thing became clear. They couldn't rely on the warship to protect them anymore. As the colonists debated their next move, Daniel and Rachel formulated a plan. Using Alex's hacking skills, they devised a way to disable key systems on the Vanguard temporarily, giving them time to act. They also reached out to sympathetic crew members, including Lieutenant Emily Dawson, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with the mission's true purpose. Together, they formed a loose alliance, united by a shared desire to stop Project Horizon. The tension aboard the Vanguard grew palpable as the hours passed. Crew members whispered nervously in the corridors, unsure whom to trust. Captain Hayes remained locked in her quarters, presumably consulting with her superiors via secure channels. Meanwhile, Daniel and Rachel prepared for the inevitable confrontation, knowing it would come sooner rather than later. When night fell, or what passed, for night aboard the ship, they made their move. Alex hacked into the mainframe, shutting down critical systems across the vessel. Alarms blared and lights flickered as confusion spread among the crew. In the chaos, Daniel and Rachel led a group of colonists to the hangar bay, intent on returning to Haven 7 before the weapon could be activated. Their escape was anything but smooth. Security teams loyal to Hayes attempted to block their path, resulting in brief but intense skirmishes. Rachel treated minor injuries on the fly, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Daniel fought alongside the colonists, his determination unwavering. Slowly but surely, they pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that failure meant certain doom. Finally, they reached the hangar bay and boarded a shuttle. As the engines roared to life, Daniel took one last look at the Vanguard, its bulk looming ominously in the darkness. He felt a pang of guilt for betraying the crew who had saved them, but he reminded himself that survival sometimes required hard choices. The shuttle descended rapidly toward Haven 7, breaking through the atmosphere in a blaze of heat and light. Below them, the planet stretched out, scarred but resilient. The colonists cheered weakly, their spirits buoyed by the sight of home. For better or worse, they were back where they started, but this time, they were ready to fight on their own terms. As the shuttle touched down on the cracked surface of Haven 7, Daniel and Rachel stepped outside, their resolve stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. The shuttle carrying Daniel Carter, Rachel Miller, and a small group of colonists landed roughly on the surface of Haven 7. The ground was scorched and uneven, evidence of the relentless battles that had taken place over the past weeks. As they disembarked, the air felt heavier than before, charged with both tension and determination. The colonists knew they were taking a huge risk by returning to the planet, but staying aboard the Vanguard meant certain betrayal. They had no choice but to fight for themselves now. Daniel scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the settlement. It looked even worse than when they had left it. with more buildings reduced to rubble and the makeshift defenses barely holding together. The engineers from the Vanguard had begun setting up their equipment, but much of it remained incomplete. Whatever Project Horizon entailed, it wasn't ready yet, and that gave them a slim window of opportunity. "We need to move fast," Daniel said, turning to address the group. His voice carried authority despite the exhaustion etched into his face. "If we can sabotage their setup, maybe we can stop them from using that weapon." Rachel nodded, her expression grim but resolute. "And we'll need to warn the others still on the ship. If Hayes figures out what we're doing, she might try to retaliate." The group split into teams, each tasked with a specific objective. Daniel led a team to disable the shield generators and automated turrets being installed around the settlement. These systems were designed to protect Haven 7 from Krill attacks, but they could also be used against the colonists if Captain Hayes decided to turn hostile. Rachel stayed behind to coordinate communications, ensuring everyone remained connected while keeping an eye on any updates from the Vanguard. Alex Monroe, meanwhile, focused on hacking into the warship systems remotely, hoping to create further distractions and buy them more time. As Daniel and his team approached the first generator site, they moved cautiously, sticking to shadows and avoiding open areas where surveillance drones might spot them. The machines hummed softly, their sleek designs gleaming under the twin suns. Daniel couldn't help but marvel at the advanced technology. Earth Command clearly spared no expense for this mission, but admiration quickly turned to anger. This wasn't about protecting humanity, it was about testing weapons on innocent lives. The team worked quickly, planting explosives near the base of the generator. They didn't want to destroy it completely, just disable it long enough to disrupt the operation. As they finished wiring the charges, one of the colonists whispered urgently, pointing toward a group of Vanguard engineers heading in their direction. Without hesitation, Daniel signaled for everyone to retreat, melting back into the ruins of the settlement as silently as they had come. Back at the command post, a hastily fortified structure near the center of the colony, Rachel monitored their progress through a portable terminal Alex had rigged earlier. She listened intently to the chatter coming from the Vanguard, piecing together fragments of conversation between crew members. Tensions aboard the ship were high, with some questioning the ethics of Project Horizon and others defending it as necessary for humanity's survival. Rachel felt a pang of guilt knowing that not all the crew supported Hayes' mission, but there was no time to dwell on moral complexities. "Daniel, you've got incoming," Alex said suddenly, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "A squad of engineers is heading your way. Looks like they noticed something." Daniel cursed under his breath but kept moving. He directed his team to take cover behind a collapsed wall, waiting for the engineers to pass. When they finally did, the colonists struck swiftly and silently, disabling them without causing serious harm. It wasn't easy. These were trained professionals armed with cutting-edge gear, but the element of surprise worked in their favor. Once the engineers were subdued, Daniel ordered 2 of his people to stay behind and guard them while the rest pressed on. Meanwhile, Rachel received a distressing update. A Krill scout ship had been spotted entering orbit, likely drawn by the activity on Haven 7. If the aliens launched another attack, the colonists would be caught in the crossfire between the Krill and the Vanguard. The situation was spiraling out of control, and every decision felt like rolling the dice. "Alex, we need to speed things up," Rachel said, her voice tight with urgency. "Can you trigger those explosives early?" Alex hesitated, his brow furrowed in concentration. "I can, but it'll alert Hayes immediately. She'll know someone's interfering." "Do it anyway," Rachel replied firmly. "We don't have a choice." With a few keystrokes, Alex activated the charges. Explosions erupted in quick succession, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the sky. Alarms blared across the settlement, and within moments, the Vanguard began broadcasting orders to secure the area. Captain Hayes herself appeared on screen, her face pale but composed. "This is mutiny," Hayes declared, her tone icy. "Stand down immediately, or I will take action." Daniel stepped forward, addressing the camera mounted on a nearby drone. "No, Captain, this is survival. We won't let you use us as test subjects for your weapon." Hayes stared at him for a long moment, her jaw tightening. Then she cut the transmission, leaving only static in its place. Everyone braced themselves for what came next. True to her word, Hayes acted swiftly. Shuttles descended from the Vanguard, deploying security teams to retake control of the settlement. At the same time, the Krill arrived in force, swarming the perimeter with terrifying efficiency. Caught between two enemies, the colonists fought back with everything they had left: homemade explosives, scavenged weapons, and sheer desperation. In the chaos, Alex managed to hack into the Vanguard's mainframe again, accessing controls for Project Horizon itself. The weapon was partially operational, its energy core glowing ominously as it powered up. If activated, it would unleash devastation on an unimaginable scale, obliterating both the Krill and the colonists alike. "We can't let her do this," Alex said, his voice trembling. "But I don't know how to stop it." Rachel placed a hand on his shoulder, steadying him. "You've done amazing work so far. Trust yourself." Taking a deep breath, Alex typed furiously, rerouting commands and overriding safeguards. With a final keystroke, he triggered the weapon prematurely, aiming its pulse at the largest concentration of Krill forces outside the settlement. The resulting blast lit up the sky, a searing wave of energy that incinerated the alien attackers. Instantly, the shock wave rocked the entire area, knocking many off their feet. When the dust settled, silence fell over Haven 7. The Krill were gone, wiped out in an instant. But the cost was staggering. The Vanguard sustained heavy damage from the backlash of its own weapon, drifting in orbit like a wounded beast. Below, the colonists emerged from their shelters, battered but alive. Captain Hayes contacted them once more, her voice weary but resigned. "You've won," she admitted. "But at what price?" Daniel stepped forward, meeting her gaze through the camera lens. "The price is justice, and a chance to rebuild." Hayes didn't respond, her image fading as the transmission ended. For better or worse, the battle was over, but the scars would remain. The aftermath of the battle left Haven 7 in ruins, but the colonists were alive. The air was thick with smoke and ash, and the ground was littered with debris from both the Krill attack and the catastrophic blast of Project Horizon. Survivors wandered through the wreckage, their faces streaked with dirt and tears, searching for loved ones or simply trying to comprehend what had happened. It was a scene of devastation, but also of quiet determination. The colonists had faced unimaginable odds and survived, not because they were saved by outsiders, but because they had fought together. Daniel Carter stood near the edge of the settlement, his arms crossed as he watched the horizon. The twin suns were setting, casting long shadows across the broken landscape. He felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that the Krill were gone, anger at the betrayal by the Vanguard, and guilt over the lives lost in the conflict. Despite everything, he knew the colony still had a chance to rebuild. They had proven their resilience, and that gave him hope. Rachel Miller approached him, her medical kit slung over one shoulder. She looked exhausted, her movements slow and deliberate, but there was a spark of resolve in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. Daniel shrugged, not turning to face her. "I don't know. I keep thinking about what could have happened if we hadn't acted when we did." Rachel nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. "We made the right choice," she said firmly. "No matter how hard it was, we did what we had to do." Daniel finally turned to look at her, his lips curving into a faint smile. "You're stronger than you think, you know that?" "So are you," Rachel replied, returning the smile. "And so is everyone else here." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Lieutenant Emily Dawson emerged from the haze, her uniform torn and stained with soot. She hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice hesitant but sincere. "Captain, Hayes wants to meet with you," she said. "She's changed her stance." Daniel raised an eyebrow, skeptical but curious. "What does she want now?" "She says she's willing to help us rebuild," Emily explained. "The Vanguard isn't fully operational, but we can still salvage parts and resources. Hayes knows she messed up and she's ready to make amends." Rachel exchanged a glance with Daniel, unsure whether to trust this sudden change of heart. Still, they agreed to hear Hayes out. If nothing else, they needed whatever assistance the warship could provide. The meeting took place in the remains of the central building, where Captain Laura Hayes waited alongside a small group of her officers. Her usual confidence seemed diminished, replaced by a weary humility. When Daniel and Rachel entered, she stood and addressed them directly. I owe you an apology, Hayes began, her voice steady but tinged with regret. I let orders cloud my judgment, and I put innocent lives at risk. That's on me. Daniel studied her carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity. For once, he found none. Apologies won't fix what happened, he said bluntly, but we'll listen to what you have to offer. Hayes nodded, accepting his words without argument. We can't undo the past, but we can work toward a better future. The Vanguard may be damaged, but its crew has skills and resources that can help you rebuild Haven 7. All I ask is that you give us a chance to prove ourselves. Rachel spoke up then, her tone measured but firm. We'll accept your help, but only under our terms. This is our home, and we'll decide how it's rebuilt. Hayes agreed without hesitation, and over the next few days, the crew of the Vanguard worked alongside the colonists to clear debris, repair structures, and establish temporary shelters. The collaboration was awkward at first, with lingering mistrust on both sides, but slowly, bonds began to form. Some of the crew members confided in the colonists about their own doubts regarding Project Horizon, while others shared stories of life aboard the ship. These interactions helped bridge the gap between them, fostering a fragile but growing sense of unity. As the settlement began to take shape again, Daniel and Rachel focused on ensuring the colony's survival. Food supplies were stretched thin, but they managed to ration carefully, supplementing their diet with edible plants native to Haven 7. Water remained scarce, but Alex Monroe devised a system to collect moisture from the atmosphere using salvaged equipment from the Vanguard. His ingenuity earned him praise from everyone, including Hayes herself, who admitted privately that the teenager reminded her of her younger self. Despite the progress, challenges remained. The emotional toll of the battle weighed heavily on the EA colonists, many of whom struggled to sleep or focus on daily tasks. Rachel dedicated herself to helping them heal, organizing group discussions and offering individual counseling whenever needed. She encouraged people to talk about their experiences, emphasizing that sharing their pain was the first step toward recovery. Daniel, meanwhile, took charge of planning Haven 7's long-term future. He gathered input from the colonists, ensuring everyone had a voice in shaping the new settlement. Together, they decided to prioritize sustainability, designing systems that relied less on imported technology and more on local resources. They also established stricter protocols for defense, determined never to be caught off guard again. One evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon, Daniel climbed to the top of a partially rebuilt wall to survey the settlement. The scars of battle were still visible, but so were signs of renewal. People laughed and talked as they worked, their spirits lifting with each passing day. Children played among the ruins, their laughter echoing like music. It was far from perfect, but it was theirs. Rachel joined him a few moments later, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. She handed one to Daniel and sat beside him, gazing out at the horizon. It's going to take time, she said quietly, but we'll get there. Daniel nodded, sipping the warm liquid. Yeah, we've already come farther than I thought possible. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Eventually, Rachel broke the quiet. Do you think Earth Command will send someone to check on us? Daniel shrugged. Maybe. But even if they do, it doesn't matter anymore. We've learned to rely on ourselves and on each other. Rachel smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder. That's all we really need. Below them, the settlement buzzed with activity, a testament to human resilience and adaptability. The people of Haven 7 had endured betrayal, loss, and despair, but they had emerged stronger because of it. Their journey was far from over, but they faced the future with courage and hope. In the distance, the damaged hull of the Vanguard loomed in orbit, a reminder of the choices that had shaped their fates. Yet even as the warship drifted silently, above, the colonists knew they no longer needed it, or anyone else, to survive. They had built something greater than walls or weapons, a community bound by trust and determination. And as the night deepened, Daniel and Rachel stayed on the wall, watching over their home, ready to face whatever came next.